of these insights with people, and you get, oh, they would never do that to us, would they? No, no. Even though the evidence in so many areas is very clear in the public domain, they will do anything to make a few billion that they can then ship offshore. Here, this is a response to a written question, 5G on health hazards. And this was just October of last year. And this is Matthew Hancock, to ask the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport what assessment his department has made about the safety of 5G with respect to human health. So, we have got the question asked in Parliament. Here's the response. 5G is the latest evolution of mobile communications technology and currently in its development stages. 5G is likely to be deployed as part of a patchwork of technologies, including those already in use, such as advanced LTE, 4G, Wi-Fi, as well as 5G new radio, forming a network of networks of a heterogeneous nature. A considerable amount of research is being carried out on radio waves, and we anticipate no negative effects on public health. So there you go, we can all go home. Because there's nothing to worry about at all, because in one sentence it says a considerable amount of research has been carried out on radio waves and we anticipate no negative effects on public health. I mean, how outrageous is that? I mean, because there's not a reference to any report or study. It's just a bland, dismissive statement. Nothing to see here. Keep moving along. It goes on, the government expects that existing UK technological standards will be adhered to throughout the development and the deployment of 5G products and networks. These standards draw on the International Commission of Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, which takes into account the well-researched effects of radio waves. As 5G continues to develop, the government is committed to working with Public Health England Centre for Radiation, Chemical and Environmental Hazards, CRCE, in order to monitor available evidence and will take action if necessary. I mean, this is a classic piece of, I mean, this is like something straight out of Yes Minister. It's the obfuscation. You make a statement without actually saying anything, and you certainly don't make any commitment to do any study, and you certainly don't acknowledge that there's any issue of risk. As I'm sure you're aware, what we're being told is that 5G is going to be trialled in 16 cities around the UK. Yep, 16 cities. Okay, well, these types of strategies are used for a reason. It's called creating the blind. And you're going to see this a few times as we go through the first part of the evening. Creating the blind. So in other words, provided you're not living in one of these 16 cities, you've got nothing to worry about. So carry on sleeping or carry on doing whatever you're doing because you've got nothing to worry about because you are not being targeted here. It's just the 16 cities. But what is happening, and I'll show you some of the clues, but what is happening is whilst the infrastructure is being flagrantly and openly installed in those 16 cities, it's also being installed everywhere else. So what's going to happen in about mid-2020, there's going to be a media report, unless of course we change it, but we'll come to that. But there's going to be a media report published in 2020 that says, well, the 16 cities where we've been testing 5G, it's all worked amazingly well. And so well that actually we're going to roll it out right across the country. And oh, coincidentally, we've already got the infrastructure in place, so bam! Mid-2020, or thereabouts, the whole country is then in 5G, in a 5G net. And then we will start to see the negative health impacts. And, you know, it's always the case, and this is the case in Gateshead and Newcastle right now, because there are families that are witnessing firsthand the negative health impacts on this, particularly young children. But those who haven't yet been affected by it say, no, can't be anything to do with that. And then they're saying, but you know, we can't sleep. You know, we're depressed, we're at each other's throats. And of course we know that violence, particularly domestic violence involving youth, is on a massive increase. And part of this is not domestic abuse between partners, it's domestic abuse with children sorting their parents. Do you know what the fastest way to piss off your teenager is? Take their phone away. And the massive increase in domestic violence involving teens and parents is related to screen time. To either trying to get them to switch off the screens to come to the meal table, or get to sleep. And of course it's having a massive impact on behaviour. You know, just at a time in life which, as we all know, I mean, adolescence is that one time of life that we've all been through but we know nothing about, right? Anyway, just aside, when I made that observation the other night in Birmingham, there was a couple sitting in the second row, and I said that, you know, big problem is teens taking it out on their parents when they want to take their phone off them, and this lady turned to her partner and said, "It's not just teens, is it?" I said, "If you want to have a domestic, can you have it later?" Anyway, Bournemouth is one of the 16 cities. And Bournemouth have very kindly, in conjunction with Ordnance Survey, who have found a tremendous new revenue stream, which is helping authorities and the telecoms companies to map out the communities and identify where these phone masts need to be sited. So let's have a look at a couple of videos from Bournemouth.
And data required to produce what we call a digital twin of the real world.
One of the reasons Bournemouth was chosen is the lay of the land is representative within a small area of the vast area that eventually this will have to cover. Ordnance Survey's role, working with Bournemouth Borough Council and the Met Office, is to model how 5G is going to work, how we can successfully introduce it throughout the United Kingdom.
So the task is to map part of the Bournemouth area to enable us to look at positioning new aerials for 5G technologies, to try and identify the best places to deploy these as quickly and effectively as possible. These signals which we're talking about, they're very, very high frequency. And high frequency signals are affected by very small items. So it's important to know where those small items are accurately.
So things like tree canopies, weather, all affect the dissipation of the signal. And so it's really important that we understand the current built environment, but also the emerging built environment.
What you can see on the screen is a red and green pattern. The red is showing where the aerial cannot see anything by line of sight. The green is showing where it can see things by line of sight. So by combining a number of aerials and seeing what their line of sight is, we can cover specific regions knowing that we've got full coverage for the 5G signal in that area.
So precision is absolutely central to this, and Ordnance Survey has precision in its DNA.
No longer is it good enough to say it's 1 or 2 metres away. It's got to be within centimetres, if not less. And with the Ordnance Survey data and our ability to survey at that level of detail, it puts us in an unprecedented situation to provide that level of detail for this work.
I really do think the time of Ordnance Survey has come. Our obsession about precision and about millimetre accuracy is here.
We're on the verge of something amazing. You know, the United Kingdom is an incredible place, but we are a brilliant country, and here is yet another example where we are about potentially to lead the world in 5G technology.
So this is a massive opportunity for Ordnance Survey because no one's buying maps anymore. But they're selling their data obviously to the satellite navigation companies, and now this is massive because obviously this gives them an opportunity potentially to pick up these survey contracts with every single authority in the country and working in conjunction, obviously, with the telecoms companies. And as you saw in that graphic, what they're doing is computer simulating where the aerial can reach, because with 5G frequencies, because they're so high, because we're dealing with microwave frequencies, which is acknowledged as everything above 900 megahertz. And you know, a lot of this is going to be at 2.4 gigahertz and upwards. And if I tell you that your microwave oven works on 2.4 gigahertz, you'll start to, different power levels of course, but you know, nonetheless, you start to see that we're dealing with frequencies that have a potential to do a lot more than just communicate information. But because it's working literally line of sight, and that's why they have to model this, because they know that they are going to need a 5G transmitter receiver every 300 meters, right across the country. And you'll see why they need them right across the country in just a second. Let's go to the second video.
If you're looking at a 3D map,
and listen very carefully here to what one of the ladies in this video has to say about the difficulty of items that block 5G frequencies. And listen to what it is that she says.
we understand surveying data and we understand the importance of accuracy, repeatability as well, so it's all about quality. Our 3D models are made up of what are called a point cloud. Each one of those points you can identify and put attributes to it, so you can find a lot about the materials it's made of, the surface types, history of that data as well. So they're intelligent 3D models.
Our role in it was really to supply as many data sets as we possibly could to Ordnance Survey for the project. Everything from street lighting and lampposts and bus shelters all the way through to the types of tree growing in Horseshoe Common in the town centre of the Lansdowne.
The data that we provided to our project partners was really important because it filled in one of the key knowledge gaps in the project. The 5G Innovation Centre partners really worked out how radio waves would transmit around that cityscape. And then the Met Office were able to really drop real weather on top of that, just to show exactly how much that might change if it started to rain really heavily.
In terms of the signal propagation, it was really important for Ordnance Survey to be able to understand lines of sight for this project. And obviously, you know, if you have foliage or trees or even hanging baskets in the town centre, that can affect how the signal is transmitted.
To our knowledge, no other mapping technology would be able to do that efficiently. The Ordnance Survey 3D mapping with a high resolution and fast computing of this information, that was unique expertise that brought into the project.
The opportunities are endless having completed this project. Ordnance Survey have got a fantastic opportunity to exploit what we've learnt on the 5G project, not just for 5G, but for other initiatives as well, digital built equipment, connected autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, and underground assets. Having good accurate 3D models just opens up so many doors for the future.
Okay, so the lady who is responsible for the 5G rollout at Bournemouth City Council, did you hear what she said? Trees, foliage, and even hanging baskets have an impact on signal propagation. Well, as I'm going to show you, and actually one of the partners that were listed in the logos in the opening sequence of these videos is the University of Surrey at Guildford. And the University of Surrey has a centre of 5G excellence. In other words, the industry is giving the University of Surrey a big chunk of money. And I'm going to show you the report later, which is the absolute acknowledgement that trees with leaves on are a major, major problem for 5G signals. And trees with leaves which have raindrops on are a total block. So why do you think over 100,000 trees have been culled around the country in the last few years, and this is just the start? Network Rail have a plan to cull 8.5 million trees from the railway network around the country. Supposedly because these trees need pollarding. Well, as you're going to see, this is way more than pollarding. This is destruction. This is arbicide, the destruction of the tree population. And it seems that we're losing knowledge. Back in the is there anybody here who worked with, say, the electricity or the gas boards back in the 60s and 70s, or even with British Rail back then? No? Okay. Well, back in the 60s and 70s, if you joined one of these companies out of university as a graduate, it didn't matter what kind of degree you got, you spent the first 2 years working all around the front line. So, if you were in the electricity board, you were digging trenches, you were putting up cabling, you were pulling wires, because back then you joined one of these organisations as a career, with the intent of working your way up through the management structure. And then to make sure that basically once you got into a position of management that you at least had a pretty good understanding of how the industry operated, you went through all this 2 year of basic training. Now the engineers are coming straight out of university and going straight into design roles. And it seems that somebody seems to along the way have lost the level of awareness or knowledge as to why these trees were planted along the railway lines by the Victorian engineers. Obviously, part of the reason was screening from the steam. Another reason was to deal with the pollution generated by the steam engines, because the Victorians were well aware that trees were remarkable in the way in which they dealt with pollution, which is why they put so many trees in the industrial cities particularly across the north of England. But the other reason on the railways was because they bind soil on the embankments and the cuttings of the railway network. So by cutting these trees, you know what's going to happen? As soon as we get a heavy downpour of rain, we're going to get reports of landslides causing disruption on the railway. But it seems that we've lost this ability to actually think through the implications of decisions that are being made. So anyway, once it became apparent last year that Network Rail had this objective to take all the trees, and the reason that they need all the trees removed is because the European Rail Network Signalling System, which is due to be rolled out in the middle of 2020, operates on 5G. So it needs clear line of sight. Another reason that it needs clear line of sight is because 5G really isn't about improving your mobile phone experience. You know, part of the blurb that's being pumped out is you'll be able to download a full-length movie in HD in 3 seconds. Well, whoopee-doo. Because it doesn't take that much longer now. But it has really nothing to do with that. That's just a sop to get people to say, oh yeah, well that's a good idea then, isn't it? This is about bandwidth. It's about the Internet of Things. It's about every single product that's produced having its own unique IP address and having a chip embedded in it. And if anyone's wearing any clothes from Marks and Spencer's, you are already wearing an item of clothing that has its own IP address. Purely for the purposes of stock control, of course. But with the 5G technology, what would be possible is, as you're walking down the street, the network would actually trigger the chip that's embedded in the clothing, and then what would actually be logged somewhere in the system, in the matrix, is that you know, so-and-so bought this item, Ian Crane bought that jacket from Marks and Spencer's in Kingston upon Thames in Surrey on such and such a date. That's another reason I always use cash. Because if you use the card, then obviously the moment that you use the card, there is the possibility of that item that you've purchased, whatever it is then directly linked in the system, because the item has a barcode. The barcode is linked to your card, that's in the system as linked to you. So you are effectively, at that point, the registered keeper of that item. And you say, well, yeah, but why would anybody want this information? It's not anybody. It's artificial intelligence. It's data gathering that most people cannot even begin to imagine. And this isn't a new agenda. The script for this was actually produced in 1932. It's in a document called Technocracy, Inc., written by Marion King Hubbard and senior moment, I've lost the surname of the other guy, it'll come to me in a second, but Marion King Hubbard and his mentor, Howard something. Anyway, they produced this report in 1932 called Technocracy, Inc. And in that, they literally visualised everything that's unfolding right now. You know, so this is, what, 87 years ago? And there it was, all laid out. But of course, back then, they didn't have the technology, but they had the vision. And what's unfolding is effectively that vision of a control network based on technology being rolled out. I mean, just an aside, I mean, I absolutely believe that when Eric Blair, George Orwell, wrote Animal Farm and 1984, he'd read the scripts, but he put him into a novel form. And I believe that 1984 is actually his attempt to raise awareness of the Technocracy Inc. agenda. And as you may know, I mean, he wrote 1984 in 1948, and he sadly died, no conspiracy, but he sadly died in the January of 49 from tuberculosis. But he was determined to finish writing and publishing in 1984 before he died, because he knew he was dying, obviously. And I believe he wrote it as a warning, and I believe he wrote Animal Farm as a warning against a left-wing totalitarian state, and he wrote 1984 as a warning against the right-wing totalitarian state. And because of this rollout of technology, it's coming along at a phenomenal rate of knots. So, the Internet of Things is one element of this, where literally everything can be monitored. And this is linked to smart meters. Anyone got a smart meter? Anyone going to admit to having a smart meter? By the way, I have found the easiest way to neuter a smart meter, not involving a pickaxe, is to change your supplier. Because once you change your supplier, the smart meter that was installed by one supplier won't work with the new supplier. They didn't think that one through very well, did they? So that's the fastest way. So I'm simply encouraging people that if you unfortunately find yourself in a situation where you have a smart meter, change your supplier. You probably get a better deal, and you tell your new supplier that you do not want the smart meter. And despite their pressure to convince you they're compulsory, they are not. And you just need to hold the ground and say you're not having a smart meter. There's no legislation that requires you to have a smart meter, and you just don't want one. So that's the fastest way to deal with that. So we've got the smart meter, and then every item having an IP address. So they will be able to monitor exactly as Marion King Hubbard and Howard Scott, thank you. Marion King Hubbard and Howard Scott, exactly as they wrote about in 1932. So every time you open the fridge door, it's recorded. Every time you take something out of the fridge, it's recorded. The chip will even be able to monitor how much milk you have in the fridge. And obviously, predictability software, because we are creatures of habit, so predictability software built into the artificial intelligence will literally be able to predict anyone's behaviour, or likely behaviour within the house. And like I said, you say, well, why would anybody want this? It's not anybody, it's artificial intelligence. It's building up this phenomenal database. But then we have something that is really a very, or should be a very significant concern. I know you're quite a long way from a motorway here, but I'm sure you've all had the pleasure of driving at 50 miles an hour on the smart motorways, yes? The smart. And of course, I'm sure you realise anything that is prefixed by the word smart ain't smart for you or me. Quite the opposite. So in these smart motorway sections, what do we have? We have new street lighting that's a lot closer together than the old sodium street lighting, which wasn't on motorways very much, normally just around sort of major intersections. But now the smart motorways, they've got these white LED, which we're going to talk about later, street lights literally every 100 metres or so. And you've also read this week in the press that the European Union, which hopefully in about 3 hours' time, no, it's not the right subject for tonight. Anyway, slipped. The European Union have introduced a directive where every car that's manufactured and sold in Europe from 2022 will have speed limiters built in. And those speed limiters will be built in using satellite technology so that the vehicle can be tracked, and as your vehicle goes into a 30-mile-an-hour zone or whatever, then the speed of your vehicle is automatically limited. Step one. But the smart motorways are being set up, and for those of you who might still be around in 2030, at that point, you will not, I predict, be able to take your vehicle onto the motorway unless you have the capability and capacity to switch your vehicle to autonomous mode. Because they know very well that vehicles on autonomous mode and driver vehicles, they don't yet mix very well. So the motorways will be limited to autonomous vehicles. Now, first are already experimenting with autonomous buses in Manchester. They haven't put them on the streets yet, but in their depot they're experimenting with autonomous bus routes. And of course, on the Docklands Light Railway, you've had autonomous trains for, what, 25, 30 years now. But that's on a track. So, we have autonomous vehicles, many of which will be electric. The electric vehicles give off EMF. In the US, with every electric vehicle that is purchased comes the instructions which in the small print advises that pregnant women do not travel in an electric vehicle. Why? Because the motor and the battery generates an electromagnetic field. And whilst they are, in theory, shielded, of course, because of product liability laws in the US, which if you've ever been to the US and sort of had to endure their commercials when they're advertising drugs, they always end every commercial on drugs with the narrator speaking at 100 miles an hour, saying what the side effects of the drug are, and it always ends with, up to and including death. And this is their get out of jail free card, you see. Apart from the fact that the pharmaceutical industry in the US has like the